Welcome to a brief webinar on what is the Positive Culture Framework. My name is Jay Otto, and I'm a research scientist with the Center for Health and Safety Culture at the Western Transportation Institute at Montana State University. At the center, we conduct research on how culture impacts health and safety. Our research is sponsored by organizations who want to make real change in the communities that they serve. This is a brief map of past and current projects. Although we're located in Montana, we conduct projects all across the United States and have even done a few projects in Canada as well. At the center, we focus on three core issues: traffic safety, substance misuse, and violence and child maltreatment. Together, these are the major contributing factors to unintentional injury, and unintentional injury is the leading cause of years of potential life lost in the United States. We also recognize that these three issues interrelate and overlap, and that in the future, efforts to address these will involve more alignment and integration at the state and community levels. The purpose of this webinar is to give you some basic background information about the Positive Culture Framework. We're going to review what is a framework, what do we mean by culture, why positive in Positive Culture Framework, and then we're going to introduce the Positive Culture Framework and its different components. To begin, let's talk about what we mean by a framework. Now, we're all familiar with the idea of a program or strategy, but we really want to differentiate a program or strategy from a framework. Now, a program is a specific actions addressing a specific behavior. It might be a curriculum or a specific policy, and will assess how well we do it based on fidelity. A framework is different. A framework is a way of organizing our work. It's a generalized process, and it involves critical skills. And when we think about quality, we think about quality of implementation. So a program addresses a very specific issue in typically a very specific context. A framework is much more general. And for example, with our Positive Culture Framework, we can apply that to a wide variety of issues in a wide variety of contexts. So the Positive Culture Framework is a way of organizing our work to improve health and safety. To begin understanding our framework, we want to introduce a little bit of theory so you see the scientific grounding of our approach. Now, when we think about improving health and safety, ultimately, that's going to require changing people's behavior. And it will require changing behavior of many different people, not just, let's say, our focus population. If we're trying to reduce underage drinking among high school students, our focus population might be changing drinking behaviors of high school students. However, when we think about reducing underage drinking, we also recognize we want to change the behaviors of parents, schools, workplaces, and communities. So really, when we talk about changing behavior, it's changing the behaviors of many different layers of our social environments. Now, this is a very simplified behavioral model, but it gives some important background about how we can think about this idea of changing behavior. It's a recognition that behavior comes from a certain degree of willingness and intention, which are informed by attitudes and beliefs, which are also shaped by values. Recognizing that the work of improving health and safety always requires changing behavior, it's valuable to have some behavioral science as a part of our foundation. This is a more complex behavioral model and is actually the model that we use to try to predict behavior. However, we're not going to go into details of this model today. But I do want you to know that our model is more complex than the simplified model that we're sharing with you now. Nonetheless, there's a lot we can learn from this very simplified model. For example, if our goal is to change behavior, then ultimately the focus of our work is connecting with values and shifting attitudes and beliefs. So an important question that comes up is, where do values and attitudes and beliefs come from? Because if we can start to influence the source of values, attitudes, and beliefs, then we can really create sustained, long-lasting behavior change. And this is ultimately what we're seeking when we seek to improve the health and safety of our communities. Well, clearly values, attitudes, and beliefs come from many sources. They come from how we were raised, our parents, what we learned in school, perhaps in faith communities or other organizations, and they're shaped by many different factors. In some sense, we can recognize that values, attitudes, and beliefs come from our culture. At the center, we use a very simplified but powerful definition of culture. We recognize culture as the shared values, beliefs and attitudes, and behaviors of a group of people. Now, we're not claiming that this is the only definition of culture or even the right definition of culture. It's one definition of culture, but it serves us well in our research. Some key ideas in this definition are that the values, beliefs, and attitudes and behaviors are shared. It's not that everybody has them, but we would say that most people have them. And there will always be individuals who don't necessarily share them, and that's okay. We also recognize that there are many different cultures in many different groups of people. In fact, a county within a state can have a culture, and a school can have its own culture, and a classroom within a school can have a culture. So there are many different ways that we are groups, and each of those groups can have their own cultures and subcultures. But in general, cultures tend to align more than they're different. But we want to recognize that there are many different ways that we have groups of people, and all of these have different subcultures. Now, when we approach the work of improving health and safety, we recognize that the solutions are in the community. In other words, we're going to look at the community's culture, its shared values, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors as an opportunity to improve health and safety. We're going to find those values, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors that align with improved health and safety and shine a light on them so that they can grow. And in this way, the solutions are in the community. People are partly the products of their environments, but by selecting, creating, and transforming their environmental circumstances, they are producers of environments as well. This quote by Albert Bandura is so important because we have to recognize our role in shaping our own cultures, the cultures within our communities, our organizations, our schools. We very much take an appreciative approach to our work, and this is why we call it the positive culture framework. An appreciative approach means we're going to be strength or asset-based. We're going to look at what works and how we can grow it. We're going to intentionally avoid fear and fear-based strategies because of the unintended consequences and polarization and isolation that fear can create. And we're going to very much intentionally focus on what we want to grow. In all of the work that we do, in all of the communities that we work with, our core assumption is that the positive exists and is worth growing. Our work then focuses on how we reveal the positive and how we promote and grow it. So this is a graphical representation of the positive culture framework. The left-hand side describes what we're going to do, where we're going to do it, and how we're going to do it. And the right-hand side, the green arrow, describes what we're trying to grow. So let's focus in a little bit more on the green arrow. As Stephen Covey said, let's begin with the end in mind. Now, our ultimate goal is to improve health and safety. And while that may seem obvious, we intentionally label the top of the arrow with improving health and safety. This is going to be very important that we frame all of our communications not about controlling others or government taking over, but it's all about improving health and safety. Health and safety is something that is generally valued by most people, and we want to hold that front and center and claim that as the frame for our work. We're going to improve health and safety by intentionally increasing protective behaviors and decreasing risky behaviors. And we're going to do that across the social environment of our communities, or the social ecology. It's not just about changing one behavior. It's going to be about changing many behaviors. And we're going to change behaviors by impacting cultural factors, those shared values, attitudes, and beliefs that influence behaviors. By changing and impacting cultural factors across the social ecology, we can impact behavior and embed improved health and safety in our culture, where it's much more likely to be sustained. Now, the left-hand side of the positive culture framework describes a process, a context, and skills for doing the work. We're going to begin by looking at the process. The process is described by the outer circle of blue that names 7 steps. The 7 steps are intentionally done in order, and we begin by planning and doing advocacy work. This is typical of many strategic processes, but it's one that we want to call out because we can't immediately jump into assessment work until we've done some planning and we've done some relationship building and advocacy work. The second step involves assessing culture. It's very important that we're not going to jump in assuming that we already know or understand our culture. We're going to begin by assessing it. This is extremely important, as research has shown there are many misperceptions about our culture that can impede or lead us to engage in inappropriate strategies. Third, after our assessment, we're going to make meaning of those results by establishing common purpose and prioritizing our opportunities. We can't do everything at once, so we need to pick what's most valuable to do and what are we ready to do and prioritize those opportunities. Next, in step 4, we're going to develop a portfolio of strategies because we have to recognize there's no single strategy that's going to address the complex issues we're facing around health and safety. It's going to require an investment of a portfolio of strategies, multiple strategies reaching across the social environment or social ecology. In step 5, we're going to pilot and refine these strategies. We're going to learn by local implementation and not go to scale until we work out some of the kinks and the challenges. Then in step 6, we'll go to much broader deployment and seek to sustain the efforts which we have put in place. And finally, in step 7, we're going to pause and evaluate our effectiveness and our future needs. And it's not that we're going to wait until step 7 to plan our evaluation. We're going to plan that in step 1. But we very intentionally want to add a step to the process where we do pause, reflect, gather the wisdom from all of our previous 6 steps so that as we engage in the process again, we do it better, faster, and more effectively. We very intentionally lay these steps out in a circle, because we'll never be done improving the health and safety of our communities. And over time, we'll continue to go around the process as we improve the health and safety of our communities. Now, many of you will recognize that these steps are common to other change processes, in particular the strategic prevention framework or other organizational change processes. And we clearly recognize that. That's okay. Many change processes have similarities. And we're not claiming that one is right or wrong, but we do want to put down and establish a process because a process is something that we can rest into as we do the work. On the outside of the circle are 3 skills. These skills are critical to implementation and are part of all 7 steps. The work of improving health and safety in our communities is an act of leadership. So developing our leadership skills and the leadership skills of other stakeholders is extremely important. In our research, we find one of the major leading indicators of success of a community in its efforts to improve health and safety are the leadership skills of the critical stakeholders. A second skill is communication. Clearly, we can't imagine any strategy that seeks to improve health and safety that does not involve communication. However, communication efforts, in particular large campaigns to impact health and safety, are extremely difficult, and many have failed. So it's very important for us to develop and hone our communication skills to be effective. And finally, integration is the skill about making things whole. As we mentioned before, there's no single strategy that's going to improve health and safety in our communities. Our efforts are going to require multiple strategies across multiple layers of the social environment. And integration is aligning and making whole all of these efforts so that they work better together and don't compete or challenge one another. Finally, context is where we will do the work. And the context is represented by the nested circles of purple in the center. These nested layers represent the social environment or social ecology, and it's a recognition that we can't just work with individuals, but we must also impact the behaviors of families and peers, schools and workplaces, and community agencies as well. And of course, there are more layers outside of community, including state, region, and nation. We limited it to these layers for simplicity with the diagram. So the positive culture framework organizes our work. It gives us guidance on what we're trying to achieve, what's in the green arrow, and how we're going to do it by engaging in a process, developing skills, and applying that process to a context, the social environment of our communities. Now, there's a lot more detail to all the components here, but today we just wanted to give you a brief overview of the basic components of the framework. Now, it's valuable to focus in on the social ecology and recognize how prevention efforts have developed over the years. In the very early years of prevention, efforts heavily focused on individual programs, often implemented as programs or curricula with students in school. As prevention has evolved, we've recognized that individual programs are not enough, and we've also begun to add in efforts to focus on policy. By changing policy at the community level, we can start to influence all the nested layers within community. However, we can recognize that policy alone isn't sufficient. And truly, we want to engage in strategies across the social environment or social ecology. Thereby, we want to engage individual programs, family and peer strategies as well as impact the policies and behaviors of schools and workplaces and community agencies. So it's really working across all these levels and having these different levels start to support and align with one another that we really take a cultural approach. This cultural approach then reinforces itself and is much more likely to be sustained. If you'd like to learn more about our research or other aspects of the positive culture framework, we have more webinars on our website. You can also learn about when our next positive culture framework training will take place. Now we'd like to share some dialogue questions to help you process your learning. How could using a framework help you be more effective? Effective at improving health and safety or addressing other issues in your community? What gives you energy or makes you excited about this framework? Who else do we need to share this framework with to support our efforts? What other health and safety issues might this framework be helpful with? And what questions remain? Feel free to visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you very much for your time.